Good morning. I am Diane Dobitz and a member of the community here. I'm serving as the worship associate this morning alongside with our minister, Reverend Diana McLean. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Mankato. All of you, whether joining us in person or on Zoom, are welcome at this time that we make sacred together. We extend an especially warm welcome to you if this is your first time attending. We appreciate that it can be difficult to cross the threshold of a new church for the first time, whether in person or on Zoom. Sunday morning is a team effort, and we are grateful for all those who make it happen. If you are attending by Zoom today, you are welcome to stay after the service to visit together. For those attending in person, we have refreshments in the fellowship hall after worship. Our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that our fellowship meets on the traditional homelands of the Dakota peoples. In continuing to understand our shared history, accepting responsibility for reparations, and building relationships in the here and now, we want to go beyond land acknowledgement as we seek to be good relatives. Together, let us kindle a flame symbolizing our co-creation of sacred space at home and in this place, made sacred by years of love. If you are on Zoom, please write in the chat that a chalice is lit on your street. And please say the words with me from the pew cards on the slide. We are a welcoming people, thirsty commit to nourish the spirit, broaden the mind, nurture the earth, and build community. May this flame we kindle remind us to strive today and every day to love beyond belief.
Our call to worship this morning is Renewal in a Weary World by Sherry Woodbury. Welcome all who seek renewal in a weary world. Welcome all who come with love and energy to share. Welcome to those who worry for the future. Welcome each one who is grateful for today. Know that in this place you are not alone. In community we share our strength with one another, and we keep the flame of love burning bright. Know that in this place, responsibility is shared. Here, tradition holds us. Ancestors shine a light from the past. Here, the young lift their bright faces and beckon us onward. Take my hand, and we can go on together. In that spirit, come, let us worship together. And I invite you to rise in body or spirit and join in singing our opening hymn, number 1000, Morning Has Come, in the teal hymnal, and the words will also be on the slide.
Generosity is one of the spiritual qualities we aspire to, and one of the practices we nurture in this community. With our offering, we give of our resources to support the work of the church. We know that giving financially is only one of the ways we support that work. We do it too with our time and our talents. All three are necessary for the vital work we do, for each other and for the wider community. We can give in person in baskets that are brought around, or online using either the QR code on your Zoom screen and on the Pew card, or giving link on our UUFM webpage. If you are here in person but give online, as many of us do, we invite you to touch the basket as it passes you in a small ritual of recognition of your financial commitment to our congregation. Please give generously as you are able. Thank you. Our reading this morning is from Hope in the Dark by Rebecca Sully. Sometimes one person inspires a movement, or her words do. Those words decades later, inspiring people. Sometimes a few passionate people change the world. Sometimes they start a mass movement, and millions do. Sometimes those millions are stirred by the same outrage or the same ideal, and change comes upon us like a change of weather. All that these transformations have in common is that they begin in the imagination, in hope. To hope is to gamble. It's to bet on the future, on your desires, on the possibility that an open heart and uncertainty is better than gloom and safety. To hope is dangerous, and yet it is the opposite of fear. For to live is to risk. I say all this because hope is not like a lottery ticket you can sit on the sofa and clutch, feeling lucky. I say it because hope is an axe you break down doors with in an emergency, because hope should shove you out the door, because it will take everything you have to steer the future away from endless war, from the annihilation of the earth's treasures and the grinding down of the poor and marginal. Hope just means another world might be possible, not promised, not guaranteed. Hope calls for action. Action is impossible without hope. At the beginning of his massive 1930s treatise on hope, the German philosopher Ernst Bloch wrote, "The work of this emotion requires people who throw themselves actively into what is becoming, to which they themselves belong. To hope is to give yourself to the future, and that commitment to the future makes the present inhabitable."
Please rise in body or spirit and join in singing hymn number 346 in the gray hymnal or on the screen. Come sing a song with me. When I chose this topic for today a month or more ago, many people were feeling grave concern about both major political party candidates for this fall's presidential election, and we had just experienced the shock of an assassination attempt against one of the candidates, a level of political violence most of us were not expecting. I was seeing, and if I'm honest, sometimes feeling a lot of despair as people felt that things were just getting worse week after week in our increasingly divisive national political scene. We were then, and still are now, also dealing with many other challenges in our nation, many of which have been ongoing since at least 2016, and for some of us have been going on for centuries longer than that. We are also in the midst of a spike in COVID cases, more than 4 years into a pandemic that many of us initially hoped would be over in a few weeks, which seems naive now, but I remember feeling that way. Or at the worst, certainly it would be over by the end of summer, 4 summers ago. While things are, of course, much better now than that there are vaccines, the pandemic is clearly not gone. I myself have several people in my circles that are currently experiencing COVID, and it is still disproportionately affecting already vulnerable populations. And too many people are so tired of dealing with it that we are just no longer being cautious. And so, as I was choosing topics for this month a month ago, I thought there are plenty of things that can make us feel hopeless and helpless, and we should talk about that. When I chose this topic, I have to admit I personally was feeling less hope than I wanted to. Perhaps it's true what they sometimes say, that we ministers often preach a message that we also need to hear. Some things have changed in the last few weeks, things that give me hope, and perhaps you're feeling the same way. But we're not going to focus on the specifics of that hope today. My choice of this topic was not about a specific current event, but about a human reality, the need for hope. I always find some hope watching the Olympics, and so that has been part of my rising spirits in the last couple of weeks, seeing stories not only of great athletes and the lives that have led them to these pinnacle moments in their athletic careers, but also seeing genuine respect and friendship across lines of competition, of nationality, of cultural differences, and more. I felt hope when I saw 2 gymnastics competitors from the United States literally bow down to the woman from Brazil who won gold in their event. I felt hope when I saw the human interest stories of some of the athletes, learning more about what they have had to overcome to even be at the Olympics, whether or not they go home with a medal. One of the notable moments that gave me that feeling was seeing interviews with some of the Ukrainian Olympic teams. We often talk about hope as the opposite of despair, but lately I've been wondering about joy as another opposite of despair, and thinking that perhaps joy and hope together are not only the opposite of, but also the antidote to despair. I think sometimes we lose hope because we aren't feeling any joy, and perhaps there is the need for at least a little joy to make space for hope. Sometimes, when we've been feeling despair, it only takes a small shift for hope and joy to begin to return, even before a concrete success or improvement has happened. One of the stories that reminds me of this shift into hope, even without complete success, is the story of my very first act of protest. I was 17. I was in my first semester of college at the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis. It was the fall of 1988, and the university had decided to tear down Memorial Stadium, the football stadium on campus, built in 1924 and dedicated to the 3,527 students, graduates, and workers who served in World War I. They determined that they would tear it down to make space for a new aquatic center. Students, alumni, and others in the wider community were protesting this action for a variety of reasons, mostly to do with 2 things: an objection to keeping college football off campus as it had been for about 6 years at that point, and objections to destroying a structure that was created as a memorial, funded largely by donations, against the wishes of the large majority of students, faculty, and alumni. Some of us, including me, showed up in the early mornings in the fall and into the winter, often in cold weather, holding hot cider or hot chocolate in our hands to stay just a little bit warmer, intending to block the access of the demolition equipment to the stadium. Now, 1988 is a long time ago, and I no longer remember how many mornings I showed up as part of that protest or how long the protest went on. What I do remember is the great joy we felt when we had some initial success, postponing the demolition of the stadium. Especially as young adults, many of whom, including me, had never been activists before, we had a feeling of pride, a sense of, look, we did that. And it gave us hope to realize that we could make a difference. We didn't have to just watch as something that mattered to us was destroyed. It mattered to us to learn that we, who had no official power and very little influence as individuals, could collectively, at least temporarily, stop the actions of the powerful university. The final outcome was a compromise that ultimately felt more like a loss than a win for many of us. The stadium was torn down in 1992, and the Aquatic Center and an Alumni Center now stand in its place. But a few pieces of Memorial Stadium were preserved, including the entrance arch. Eventually, in 2009, a new stadium was built on campus, and college football returned to the college campus. The original Memorial Stadium was still gone, but some of our goals were met. Even though we grieved the destruction of Memorial Stadium, that compromise still affirmed that we had made some difference, that our actions were not entirely in vain. And that made the difference between feeling hopeless and hopeful. It gave us hope not only in that moment that we might achieve some of what we were hoping for, but also a longer-term hope that stays with me still decades later, hope that in each new situation I can partner with others and together we can make a difference. My first protest experience led to many more over the course of decades because of that hope. I imagine that many of you could tell similar stories of times when you made a difference and came away feeling both pride and hope. Even when we are not the ones making change, sometimes all it takes to ignite hope after a really rough time is that moment when something starts to shift. In our case, the moment where literally the equipment could not get to the stadium. Something starts to shift even before any substantive change has happened. It's a more intangible, feel it in the heart rather than observe it with the eyes kind of shift. And that shift, even as it is just beginning, can feel like turning a corner, like moving in a more promising direction. When that happens, whether it's on the small scale of your individual or family life, or the large scale of national or even global events, or anywhere in the spectrum in between those two. When that shift begins, hopes rise, our energy level increases, and joy feels possible again. In our reading this morning, you heard some excerpts from Rebecca Solnit's Hope in the Dark, Untold History's Wild Possibilities is the subtitle for that book. Solnit originally wrote the book in 2003 and early 2004. It began as an essay that she published online shortly after the United States launched its war on Iraq. She updated it with a third edition in 2015, which is the version we're quoting from today. And 2015 feels to me like a very long time ago, almost a different world in so many ways. Yet now, there are portions of the book that feel like a message to us in exactly this time, a time when so much is threatened, including the viability of both our democracy and our planet. Solnit began the foreword to the third edition of the book back in 2015 with this. Your opponents would love you to believe that it's hopeless, that you have no power, that there's no reason to act, that you can't win. Hope is a gift you don't have to surrender, a power you don't have to throw away. And though hope can be an act of defiance, she says, defiance isn't enough reason to hope, but there are good reasons. She then went on to list her personal list of reasons, which were more specific to that time, so I won't list them today. She also said, "This is an extraordinary time full of vital, transformative movements that could not be foreseen. It's also a nightmarish time." Those words, too, feel like they could be written for us today. She then recited in the book a long list of the nightmares that we were facing in 2015, to which we could certainly add much more today, including the ongoing pandemic and rising fascism. But that's not what I want us to focus on today. After that list of her nightmares, Solnit continued, "Hope doesn't mean denying these realities. It means facing them and addressing them by remembering what else the 21st century has brought, including the movements, the heroes, and the shifts in consciousness that address these things now." And she then went on to offer a list of reasons for hope just as long as her list of nightmares, perhaps longer. For those among you who may be having trouble finding reasons for hope right now, whether for personal reasons or more national issues, I offer this piece of nuance from Solnit. It's important to say what hope is not. It is not the belief that everything was, is, or will be fine. The evidence is all around us of tremendous suffering and tremendous destruction. The hope I'm interested in, she says, is about broad perspectives with specific possibilities, ones that invite or demand that we act. It's also not a sunny, everything is getting better narrative, though it may be a counter to the everything is getting worse narrative. You could call it an account of complexities and uncertainties with openings. We can have hope without it being a denial of the things that are causing us fear. We can try to find and then hold perspectives that are broad enough to offer a more complex account, one with both uncertainties and openings. We can probably all name the uncertainties that we see. What are the openings, the hopeful things in our current situation? The most obvious, I think, is this year's elections, every year's elections, not just presidential, but all of them from the most local to the national level. Regardless of our party affiliations, we can all vote in ways that reflect our values and our priorities, and we can encourage others to do the same. As a congregation, many of you know that largely thanks to Diane's efforts, we are doing nonpartisan voter outreach through the Minnesota UU Justice Alliance, or Moose Jaws, postcard writing campaign, through which we are reaching out to renters in Minnesota, including right here in Mankato, knowing that renters historically have extremely low voter turnout compared to homeowners. As individuals, we can go further than that, doing things that we as a church should not be doing, and we can promote not only policies, but also candidates that we see as aligned with our individual values. And as we do that, we can keep the big picture in mind, looking at the long term rather than only winning or losing a particular election. Reverend Ashley Horan, who is now the Unitarian Universalist Association's Vice President for Programs and Ministries, and was the Executive Director of Moose Jaw from 2014 to 2019, and still lives in Minneapolis, she wrote a long post about this year's election recently on Facebook. The full post did talk about candidates and parties, which is not appropriate here, so I'm going to not read those things, but it also had nonpartisan wisdom that I think is relevant to our topic today. So here is an abridged version of her post. We've said it before, we'll say it again. Elections are harm reduction, not liberation. We live under an incredibly flawed system that is held hostage by two parties under which electoral victories are ultimately decided by a very small number of people who are usually not at all representative of the majority. This is especially true, she says, in national politics, and even more true in presidential elections. So for those of us who actually yearn for liberation and freedom for all people, and a government that will prioritize care for all of its citizens and those who aren't citizens too, our goal should always be to elect candidates who we are most likely to have success in agitating, organizing, pressuring, and collaborating with to get policy wins that are part of a liberatory agenda. She says, purity politics serve exactly 0 people when it comes to elections and candidates. That said, we must always have a longer horizon for our organizing than any election, and be clear that voting and electoral organizing are only one set of tactics within broader strategies for cultural, relational, and political organizing that will actually get more people free. So we absolutely have to organize around and participate in electoral politics, but we also can't have that be all we do. And more importantly, we have to understand that the work begins in earnest after folks get into office. She says, the ever-brilliant Ricardo Levins Morales teaches that the soil is more important than the seeds. Our work as visionaries, as movement builders, as organizers for liberation depends on our ability to create the conditions of possibility for victory over long arcs of time. This includes primarily creating narratives of hope, liberation, possibility, and freedom that seem not only plausible, but within our reach. We cannot accept the frames offered to us by fascism, by authoritarianism, by scarcity and oppression. Electoral politics is one tiny part of that work of soil tilling, but it is nevertheless important. So there's work to do, both before the election and after. And Ashley concludes, the soil is ours to tend, friends. The soil is ours to tend. To tend it well, we will need the power of our imagination, the power of our creativity, and the power of our hope. It is true that we are collectively, and in many cases also individually, living through a hard time. It is equally true that we have, collectively and individually, lived through other hard times, and we have the inner resources to do so again. This is not to make light of the difficulties that we face, but to say together we can do this. We can create hope for ourselves, for each other, for others in the wider world. If you have hope, offer it to those who are struggling to find it. If you are among the struggling, let us offer you hope, even as we honor what you are feeling, including despair. We tend not only the soil, but also each other, as we do the work of building a better world for all. Amen, and blessed be. I invite you to rise in body or spirit and join in singing hymn number 131 in the gray hymnal and on the slide, Love Will Guide Us.
As the Reverend Diana extinguishes the sanctuary chalice, please extinguish your chalice at home and say the words with me. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
As we prepare to leave our time of shared worship, may we seek hope. May we embrace hope. May we be energized by hope. May we spread hope. May that be our practice and our prayer. I now invite you to turn toward each other for our singing benediction, blessing each other with these words and knowing that we are each a blessing to each other.